My mom smiled like she was giving me a compliment and said, "Maya, you're the stable one. You'll be fine. You can handle yourself." Then, without even pausing, she turned to my sister and added, "So we're going to put you on the boat this weekend. You need this." That was the moment I realized what independent really meant in my family. It wasn't praise. It was permission to leave me out again. If you've ever been called strong right before you got abandoned, keep watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I grew up in a small harbor town on the West Coast, the kind of place where the air always smells like salt, old wood, and fuel from the boats. Mornings start early there, before the sun comes up. You can already hear engines coughing to life, gulls screaming over the docks, and people greeting each other by name without even turning around. In a town like that, anonymity doesn't exist. If you show up late once, people remember. If you disappear, people talk. Our house was a weathered wooden place not far from the pier. It wasn't charming in a postcard way. It was practical, old, always one problem away from becoming uncomfortable. The front step was loose, the bathroom fan rattled, the breaker tripped whenever the wind picked up. Small things, manageable things, as long as someone stayed on top of them. That someone was usually me, not because anyone officially decided it. No family meeting, no agreement. It just happened that way. If a bill needed to be paid, I paid it. If an email from the insurance company came in, I opened it. If the internet went out, I called. If something broke, I looked up who to contact and scheduled the repair around my work hours. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I never announced what I was doing. I just did it quietly. In between shifts, late at night, early in the morning. It felt easier than reminding people, easier than arguing, easier than waiting for someone else to notice. I kept records. Not obsessively, just carefully. Bank statements, insurance documents, confirmation emails. I saved them in folders on my laptop, backed them up on a small USB drive I kept in my desk drawer. It wasn't about distrust. It was about control. Knowing where things stood made me feel less anxious, like I wasn't floating without a rope. My parents liked to describe me as responsible. They said it the way people say a good thing has already reached its final form, like there was nothing left to grow. Maya's got it covered. My mom would say, "She's good with numbers." My dad would add, "She's always been independent." They never said thank you in a formal way. They didn't need to. In their minds, this was just who I was. On weekends, I'd walk past the fish market, carrying groceries, nodding at people who knew my routine. Someone would call out, still holding everything together, and laugh. I'd smile back. It felt harmless, friendly, normal. Inside the house, there was an unspoken rhythm. Things worked because someone made them work. The lights came on. The fridge stayed stocked. The insurance stayed active. And because nothing fell apart, no one questioned how close it sometimes came to doing exactly that. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my laptop open, not stressed, just checking, making sure payments went through, making sure nothing bounced, making sure there were no surprises waiting in my inbox. I'd close the computer, rinse my mug, turn off the light. Another day handled. If I ever mentioned being tired, it was brushed aside gently. "You'll be fine," my mom would say. "You always are." My dad would nod, already thinking about something else. There was no malice in it, just certainty. They believed in my capacity the way people believe in gravity. It was always there, reliable, unquestioned. In our family, my role wasn't something anyone discussed. It was assumed. I was the one who took care of the details so no one else had to think about them. And after a while, even I stopped asking whether that made sense. A neighbor once said, half joking, "You're basically the adult in that house." I laughed, corrected them, said it wasn't like that. But the comment stuck with me longer than I expected. It replayed in my head on quiet walks home, in the pause before I opened another bill. Because when effort becomes routine, people stop seeing it as effort. They start seeing it as personality, as character, as something you owe the room simply by being in it. I thought being dependable meant being valued. I thought being low maintenance meant being respected. I thought that if I kept everything steady, no one would push me out of the picture. In a harbor town, boats don't drift far before someone notices. People do, slowly, quietly, and by the time you realize it's happening, everyone else already thinks that's just the way things are supposed to be. Looking back, all the signs were there. I just didn't know they were signs yet. They didn't say it all at once. It came in pieces, little sentences that sounded harmless on their own. "You're fine. Maya, you can handle it. You've always been independent." My mom said it when something needed to be paid. My dad said it when something went wrong. And every time they said it, the conversation ended right there. If the roof leaked, I was capable. If the insurance needed renewing, I was good with details. If someone else didn't step up, it was fine, because I would. No one argued with me. No one asked if I wanted to. They just moved on, already confident the problem had solved itself. At first, I believed them. I thought being trusted meant being valued. I thought independence was a compliment you earned. But then I started noticing the pattern. Whenever something was inconvenient, it landed with me. Whenever something was exciting, it skipped right past me. And the explanation was always the same. "You don't need this. You'll understand. You're strong." It was never said with cruelty. That was the problem. It was said calmly, reasonably, like a fact no one needed to debate. If I hesitated, my mom would tilt her head and smile. "You're not like your sister," she'd say. "You don't get overwhelmed." My dad would nod, already stepping away. "You've always been able to take care of yourself." And just like that, responsibility moved from them to me, quietly, legally, emotionally. I didn't realize it at the time, but they weren't describing who I was. They were deciding what they no longer had to do. The more I proved I could handle things, the less anyone felt obligated to protect me. The more reliable I became, the more invisible my effort was. It's strange how fast that shift happens. One day you're helping. The next day, it's expected. And after that, it's no longer seen as help at all. It's just you. I started hearing the same phrases repeat, not just from my parents, but from relatives, from neighbors, from people who barely knew our family. "Maya's got it. She's the responsible one. She doesn't need much." Each time someone said it, I felt a small tightening in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just confusion. Because if I didn't need much, why was I always the one giving everything? I began to understand something uncomfortable. Calling a child independent can be a way to step away without looking like you're abandoning them. It sounds like trust. It feels like praise, but it works like permission. Permission to lean less. Permission to choose someone else. Permission to say, "You'll be fine," and mean, "I won't be there." No one ever sat me down and said, "We're relying on you." They didn't have to. The label did the work for them. Independent children don't get checked on. They get assumed. They get skipped when decisions are made. They get told afterward. And when they finally question it, they're reminded how capable they are. I started asking myself a question I'd never asked before. If I stopped handling everything, who would notice? And more importantly, who would step in? The answer scared me more than I expected, because the truth was, my independence had become convenient, not just for my parents, but for the entire system around us. And once a system benefits from you being low maintenance, it has no reason to change. That was when I realized something else. This wasn't about trust. It was about transfer. They didn't believe in me. They offloaded onto me. And the moment I saw that clearly, I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. The first time it happened, it looked small. It was a Thursday night. Everyone half tired, half distracted. My mom was scrolling on her phone. My dad was watching the weather on mute. Emily was standing by the counter, already excited about something I hadn't been told yet. We finalized the plans. My mom said, "Not looking up. The boat's booked for the weekend." I paused. "What plans?" She smiled, quick and casual. "The little cruise out past the bay. Just 2 days. Emily's been needing a break." Emily looked at me, almost apologetic. Almost. I waited. No one said my name. Well, I said, "Finally." "When were you going to tell me?" My dad cleared his throat. "We figured you'd be working anyway, and everything's already booked." My mom added, "You're busy. And you don't really need it like she does." There it was. I nodded. I even smiled. The old reflex kicked in. Of course, I'll manage. I always do. But something felt different this time. I didn't feel disappointed. I felt noted. Like a box had been checked. Like a decision had been made before I walked into the room. They kept talking about the weather, about timing, about how nice it would be for Emily to get away for once. I stood there, listening, realizing no one was asking whether I wanted to go. Not even pretending. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, not angry, just alert, like my body had decided it was done going numb. The second time came quietly, too quietly. A few days later, I was in the hallway, grabbing a charger from my room, when I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. My name came up, then stopped, then came up again. "Do we need to update the policy?" my mom asked. My dad lowered his voice. "If we're going to make changes, now's the time, because it's still under her name." My mom said, "But long term, that doesn't make sense." I froze. They weren't arguing. They were planning. I stood there, holding the charger, listening to words like adjust, transfer, and cleaner this way. They talked about the house like it was a spreadsheet, like ownership was a technical inconvenience. No one mentioned telling me. I walked back into my room and closed the door quietly. My hands were shaking, but my thoughts were clear. The house, the insurance, the paperwork I had handled for years, the things that were in my name because it was easier that way, because I was reliable, because I was stable. Stable enough to carry risk, not important enough to keep informed. That was when it clicked. The boat wasn't the betrayal, it was the test. They tried it once, with something small, a weekend, a seat left empty. When nothing happened, they moved on to something bigger, real consequences. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't need to. I felt something colder settle in. Not anger, understanding. This wasn't about money, or trips, or even favoritism. This was about control. As long as I handled things quietly, decisions could be made without me. As long as I didn't object, My absence could be planned around. As long as I stayed agreeable, my name could be moved where it was convenient. I opened my laptop and checked my email. Old confirmations, policy updates, payment notices. My name, my account, my responsibility, evidence. I closed the laptop again. In that moment, I realized something else. If they were already rearranging things without telling me, then staying silent wasn't keeping the peace. It was just making me easier to erase. I went back into the kitchen later. Everyone acted normal. Too normal. Emily talked about the boat. My mom asked what I wanted for dinner. My dad mentioned the wind picking up this weekend. I answered when spoken to. I nodded when expected. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was counting. Counting how many decisions had already been made without me. Counting how often my role had shifted from participant to resource. Counting how long I'd been included only when it was useful. If you were me, would you have said something right then, or would you have waited? Just a little longer, to see how far they were willing to go. I didn't confront them right away. I did something quieter. I waited until the house was asleep. The kind of silence that only happens after midnight, when even the wind outside the harbor seems to slow down. I sat at the small desk in my room, opened my laptop, and started with the thing I always did when I was stressed. I checked my email. At first, it felt pointless. Old confirmations, utility notices, insurance updates I'd skimmed 100 times before. The kind of boring paperwork no one ever wants to deal with. But this time, I didn't skim. I read every line. I searched my name. It showed up more than I expected. Payment confirmations, automatic withdrawals, policy renewals sent directly to me. Notifications thanking me for maintaining continuous coverage, language that assumed responsibility without ever asking for permission. I pulled up my bank statements next, month after month, the same numbers, the same transfers, repairs, emergency fixes, premiums, fees. It wasn't dramatic. It was consistent. That was the part that made my chest tighten. This wasn't me helping out. This was me holding things together. I opened the insurance portal, logged in, answered the security questions I'd set up years ago. My name was right there. Primary contact, authorized decision maker. The person they would call if something went wrong. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to, because suddenly, a lot of things made sense. Why they always told me not to worry about it. Why they said, "You're good with this stuff." Why no one ever double-checked anything I handled. I wasn't just contributing. I was carrying legal weight. And I was doing it quietly, while being told I was independent enough not to need anything in return. I leaned back in my chair and felt something shift. The anger I thought I'd feel didn't come. What came instead was colder, cleaner, clarity. I wasn't being pushed out emotionally. I was being edged out strategically. As long as my name stayed where it was useful, I was included. The moment it became inconvenient, decisions were made without me. I opened a folder on my desktop and started saving things. PDFs, statements, emails, screenshots. I copied them onto a small USB drive I'd kept from an old job, labeled it with the date, evidence. Not because I planned to throw it in anyone's face, but because for the first time, I understood something important. Truth doesn't need to be loud to be dangerous. It just needs to exist. I thought about all the times I'd tried to explain how tired I was, how overwhelmed, how invisible. Every time, it turned into a conversation about feelings, about intention, about how no one meant it that way. Feelings were easy to dismiss. Numbers weren't. Contracts weren't. Responsibility written in plain language wasn't something you could talk your way out of. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. The same fridge I'd paid for, the same utilities pulling power through accounts in my name. For years, I thought speaking up meant raising my voice. I was wrong. Speaking up sometimes means stepping back and letting the fact stand where your emotions used to beg. That night, I didn't make a plan to hurt anyone. I made a plan to stop protecting a system that didn't protect me. I stopped thinking in terms of fairness and started thinking in terms of consequences. What happens if I'm not here to buffer things? What happens if my name stops absorbing risk? What happens when the truth is no longer softened by my silence? I went to bed with the USB drive in my drawer and a strange calm in my chest. Not peace, not yet, but certainty. The kind that doesn't shake when someone tells you you're overreacting. The kind that doesn't need permission. If you were me, would you have called them out right then? Or would you have waited, just long enough, to see what happens when the truth finally stops hiding? I didn't leave the way people expect you to leave. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no moment where everyone froze and stared at me like I'd just done something unforgivable. I did something much quieter. I stopped holding the system together. It started late at night, when the house felt heavier than usual. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of every sound, the refrigerator humming, the floor creaking when someone turns over in their sleep, the wind pushing against the windows from the harbor. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and realized this was the same place I'd sat for years, fixing things no one else wanted to think about. So I opened the accounts, utilities first, the ones under my name, because it was simpler that way. I turned off autopay, updated the billing contact, added notes for future correspondence. I didn't cancel anything out of anger. I didn't cut power or cause chaos. I just removed myself from the equation, then insurance. Policies I had renewed so many times, I knew the login by muscle memory. I changed the primary contact, updated responsibility, saved the confirmation emails. Each click felt oddly calm, not empowering, not dramatic, just final. I sent a few short emails after that. Polite, neutral, almost boring. The kind of messages no one panics over until it's too late. Effective dates, account changes, confirmation numbers. I didn't explain myself. I didn't justify anything. Facts didn't need a speech. Then I gathered the things that were actually mine, not shared furniture, not sentimental items, not anything that could be argued over emotionally. Just what I had paid for. Tools I'd bought for repairs when the dock equipment broke. Devices I'd purchased because someone needed them just for now. Documents tied to contributions that had always been minimized. It all fit into fewer boxes than I expected. That part stayed with me, years of holding things together, and the proof of it could be packed quietly, without anyone noticing. I moved slowly, one box at a time. No rush, no announcement. The house didn't look different at first. The light still came on. The fridge was still cold. The Wi-Fi still worked. Systems like this don't break immediately. They rely on momentum. I moved into a small apartment near the public beach. Nothing impressive, just clean, quiet, and mine. You could hear the ocean through the windows at night, not crashing, not loud, just steady, constant, like breathing. The first night there, I sat on the floor with a takeout container because I hadn't bought furniture yet. I ate with my back against the wall and felt something I didn't expect, relief and fear, because I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving a role I'd played for so long it felt fused to my identity. Back at the old place, the absence didn't show up as empty rooms. It showed up as unanswered emails, bills that didn't magically resolve, Small problems that suddenly required decisions. Responsibility has weight, and when you put it down, people notice not because they miss you, but because they feel the pressure shift. My phone started buzzing a few days later. Did you change something? The internet's not working right. We got a notice about the insurance, I answered calmly. Those accounts aren't under my name anymore. Silence followed each time, not anger at first. Confusion, like they'd reached for something that had always been there and suddenly found empty air. That was when it hit me. They didn't miss me. They missed the function I served. At night, alone in the apartment, doubt crept in. Quiet doubt, the kind that sounds reasonable. Was this too harsh? Should I have explained more? Was I making things harder than they needed to be? Then I opened my laptop and looked at the files again. The dates, the statements, the responsibilities that had lived under my name for years without discussion. Evidence. I wasn't disappearing. I was stepping out of a structure that only worked because I was inside it. The house by the harbor didn't fall apart. It just stopped being effortless. And that difference mattered more than any dramatic exit ever could. From the outside, it probably looked like nothing happened. Inside the system, everything changed. Because when the person absorbing all the pressure steps away, the pressure doesn't vanish. It spreads. It reveals itself. It asks new questions. And for the first time, those questions weren't landing on me. I wasn't punishing anyone. I wasn't taking revenge. I wasn't destroying anything. I was letting consequences land where they belonged. That's what happens when you stop buffering reality for other people. And once you do that, there's no way to go back to being invisible. If you were me, would you have stayed and kept holding everything together? Or would you have done the one thing that actually forces a system to tell the truth, stepped out of it, quietly, and let it stand on its own? They came to see me a few days later, not all at once, one by one, like they were testing the ground to see how firm it was. My mom showed up first. She didn't knock. She never does. She stood in the doorway of my apartment and looked around, taking in the bare walls, the folded blanket on the couch, the quiet. Her mouth tightened. "So this is what you're doing now," she said. I waited. She called it selfish. She called it dramatic. She said people were talking. You didn't have to make it so public. She told me, as if consequences were a performance I'd staged on purpose. My dad followed a day later. He didn't accuse. He sighed. Said things like, "You know how this looks, and you could have handled this better." He said I'd embarrassed the family, that I'd made things harder than they needed to be. Emily didn't say much. She stood behind them, arms crossed, watching me like she wasn't sure which side of the room she belonged on. They all used different words, but they were saying the same thing. You broke the house. You took things too far. You should have stayed quiet. No one asked why I did it. They didn't ask what it had cost me. They didn't ask how long I'd been carrying things alone. They just wanted the system back. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself the way I used to. I opened my laptop and turned it toward them. I showed them the dates, the payments, the policies with my name on them. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke in a language they couldn't interrupt. My mom frowned, scrolling. My dad went quiet. Emily leaned in closer. "That doesn't mean you had to leave," my mom said finally. I looked at her, calm, tired. "I didn't leave," I said. I stopped bleeding. They didn't like that. They said it felt like revenge. They said it felt like punishment. But revenge is loud. Revenge needs an audience. What I did was different. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't hurt anyone on purpose. I just stopped giving. And that was the part they couldn't accept. Because when someone has built their comfort on your silence, your boundary feels like an attack. They said the house was falling apart. I didn't correct them, because the truth was simpler. The house wasn't falling apart. It was being forced to stand on its own. For years, I had been the quiet support beam, the thing no one saw, but everything leaned on. When I stepped away, the weight didn't disappear. It just showed itself. Systems don't collapse because one person leaves. They collapse because they were never balanced to begin with. My mom said, families don't do this to each other. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up fixing problems no one noticed, all the times I'd been told I was strong right before being left out, all the moments I swallowed discomfort to keep things smooth. I didn't do this to the family. I said, I stopped doing this for the family. That was the moment something shifted. Not relief, not forgiveness, recognition. They finally saw the cost. Not emotionally, practically. They saw what happened when the unpaid provider stopped providing, when the emotional buffer stepped aside, when the person absorbing all the impact chose to protect themselves instead. I didn't ask for understanding. I didn't ask for approval. I wasn't there to convince them. I was there to be clear. Boundaries aren't abandonment. They're first aid. They exist to stop the bleeding, not to punish the wound. If leaving creates chaos, then the chaos was already there. It was just being managed by someone who didn't complain, and I wasn't willing to disappear quietly anymore. If you were me, what would you call that? Breaking a family, or finally refusing to be the thing holding it together at your own expense? I used to believe that if I explained myself clearly enough, things would change. If I chose the right words, if I stayed calm instead of emotional, if I showed just enough hurt, but not too much. I thought there was a perfect version of the conversation that would finally make them see me. So I tried. I talked about how tired I was, about how it felt to always be the one holding things together, about how lonely it was to be dependable and invisible at the same time. My mom listened with her arms crossed. My dad nodded in silence. Emily looked at the floor. They responded the way people always do when they don't want to change anything. We didn't mean it like that. You're taking it too personally. You're strong. You can handle it. Every conversation turned into a discussion about tone, about intentions, about misunderstandings. No one ever argued that the situation was fair. They just argued that it wasn't intentional, and somehow that was supposed to make it okay. For a long time, it worked. Not because I felt better, but because feelings are easy to manage. They can be soothed, delayed, reframed, forgotten. If I cried, they waited it out. If I stayed calm, they said it wasn't serious. If I got frustrated, they said I was overreacting. As long as the conversation stayed emotional, they stayed in control. They decided what mattered. They decided when it was time to move on. They decided when enough had been said. I didn't realize it then, but every time I spoke from pain, I was asking for permission to be taken seriously. Everything changed the night I stopped talking about how I felt and started looking at what was written down. Not memories, not impressions, records. I opened files I hadn't really looked at before, not closely. I saw my name again and again, on policies, on payments, on accounts tied to long-term responsibility, dates going back years, amounts that added up quietly, language that didn't ask how I felt about any of it. I realized something unsettling. My emotions were optional. My responsibility was not. When I showed them the documents, the room changed. There were no interruptions, no reframing, no talk about intentions. They scrolled in silence. Because evidence doesn't care how uncomfortable it makes people. You can debate feelings. You can dismiss emotions. You can wait for someone to calm down, but you can't argue with a name on a contract. You can't minimize a payment history. You can't explain away liability that's been quietly assigned. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about whether I was too sensitive. It was about who was legally responsible. And that made everyone uneasy in a way my tears never had. That was my real wake-up moment. In families like mine, feelings are treated like opinions. Facts are treated like problems. Emotions invite discussion. Records demand action. I understood then why I'd been ignored for so long. As long as I spoke from pain, I was asking them to care. As soon as I spoke from documentation, I was informing them of reality. There's a difference between asking and informing. One gives people room to disagree. The other gives them consequences to deal with. People love to say families should run on love, not paperwork. And in theory, that sounds right. But love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't carry risk. Love doesn't get called when something goes wrong. Paperwork does. Evidence does. That doesn't mean feelings don't matter. They do. But feelings don't move systems. They only describe what it's like to be stuck inside one. Systems move when the cost becomes visible. When responsibility has a name attached to it, when the burden can no longer be quietly absorbed by the same person, that was the part no one expected from me. Not anger, not shouting, not revenge, just clarity. I stopped trying to be understood and started making sure the truth couldn't be erased. That's why being patient didn't protect me. That's why being the understanding one didn't protect me. That's why silence only made me easier to overlook. Evidence changed the rules. And once the truth exists outside of emotion written down, dated, undeniable, it doesn't disappear just because someone wishes it would. So if you were me, what would you trust more? The hope that someone might finally understand how you feel, or the certainty that the facts will still be there tomorrow, even if no one likes them? By the time Emily came to see me, the town already knew. That's how it works in a harbor town like ours. Someone notices a change. Someone asks a question at the fish market. Someone else fills in the blanks. Stories don't stay private for long. Not here. People stopped smiling at Emily the way they used to. Not openly hostile. Just different. Shorter conversations. Fewer invitations. The kind of quiet shift you only notice when you've always been on the comfortable side of it. She felt it before she understood it. She found me on a weekday afternoon at a small cafe near the pier. Neutral ground. No family photos, no history on the walls. Just the sound of gulls and cups clinking. She didn't sit right away. She stood there for a second, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to take up space at my table anymore. "You busy?" she asked. I shook my head. She sat down, folded her hands, unfolded them, looked out the window. For the first time, she didn't come in defensive. She didn't come in joking. She didn't come in expecting me to smooth things over. "I didn't know," she said finally. I didn't answer right away, because that sentence can mean a lot of things. "I didn't know how much was on you," she added. "I mean, I knew you helped. I just didn't know it was like that." I watched her as she spoke. She wasn't lying. Not exactly. Emily hadn't grown up plotting to take more. She grew up assuming more was just there. When something broke, it got fixed. When money was tight, it worked itself out. When decisions were made, they landed in her favor without her having to ask. That's what privilege looks like when it starts young. It doesn't feel stolen. It feels normal. She told me how weird it felt to walk into places lately, how people asked her questions she didn't have answers for. how her name suddenly carried a pause behind it. They look at me like I did something wrong. She said, I thought about that. You benefited from something that was wrong. I said, that's not the same thing. She nodded slowly, like she was turning that over for the first time. I never had to choose, she said. It was just set up. That was the truth. Golden children aren't born cruel. They're raised inside systems that protect them from seeing the cost. They don't learn to ask where things come from because nothing ever feels scarce. The real test isn't how they grow up. It's what they do once they see the imbalance. I talked to Mom and Dad, Emily said. Her voice tightened. They're angry. They think you made them look bad. I waited. They want me to tell you to come back, she added, to fix it. There it was. The choice. She could keep being the bridge, the agreeable one, the daughter who never made waves, the one who stayed liked. Or she could tell the truth and lose something in the process. I told them I wouldn't, she said quietly. I looked up. I told them I wasn't going to pretend I didn't know anymore. That cost her. I could see it already. She wouldn't say it, but I knew what it meant. Less protection, more tension. Awkward silences where comfort used to be. That's the price of stepping out of a system that benefits you. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I don't want to be that person anymore, the one who stays comfortable while someone else pays. I didn't rush to reassure her, because forgiveness isn't automatic, and understanding doesn't erase impact. But something mattered. She wasn't asking me to disappear again. She wasn't asking me to make it easy. She was willing to lose her spot as the favorite, and that told me more than any apology could. Emily didn't become a villain because she was loved more, but she also didn't become innocent just because she hadn't noticed. Growing up in privilege explains behavior. It doesn't excuse what happens next. The real measure is what someone is willing to give up once they see the truth. She sat there waiting, not pushing. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't choosing between me and them. She was choosing between comfort and honesty. If you were her, what would you choose, staying the most liked person in the room, or being the one who finally tells the truth, even if it costs you the room entirely? They asked if I was coming back, not angrily, not begging, like it was a practical question, something that just needed an answer so things could go back to normal. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said, that depends. That was new. For most of my life, I had treated family like a fixed place. You either stayed or you left. You swallowed things or you exploded. There was no middle ground. But standing there, listening to them talk about apologies and misunderstandings, I realized something. Sorry wasn't the problem. They had said sorry before, in small ways, in vague ways. I'm sorry you felt that way. I'm sorry things got out of hand. Those apologies never changed anything. They didn't change who paid. They didn't change who decided. They didn't change who carried the risk. So I told them that. I'm not cutting you off, I said, and I'm not stepping back into the same role. They looked confused, like those were the only two options they knew. I explained it slowly, not emotionally, just clearly. If we were going to have a future, it had to look different from the past. First, transparency. No more vague arrangements. No more we'll figure it out later. Every bill, every account, every policy had to be visible. Who pays what? Who is responsible for what? In writing, second, separation. No more shared responsibility that only one person actually carries. If something is under my name, I control it. If it's not, I'm not responsible for it. No exceptions. No emergencies quietly pushed onto me. Third, correction. Things that had been set up for convenience had to be fixed properly. Insurance adjusted, ownership clarified, risk assigned to the people benefiting from it. And finally, proof of change. Not promises, not intentions. Actions that could be checked later. They didn't like hearing that. My mom said it felt cold. My dad said it felt transactional. They said, "We're family." I nodded. "That's why this matters." I said, "Family without structure just means the same person pays every time." I told them something else too, something I wish someone had told me years ago. Boundaries don't have to start strong. You can start light. Light boundaries sound like this. "I'm not available for that. I can't take this on right now. Let me think about it." They test the system. They show you who listens. If light boundaries are ignored, you move to medium. Medium boundaries come with conditions. I'll help if it's shared. I'll contribute if it's documented. I'll stay involved if responsibilities are clear. They create friction. They force conversations. And if even those are pushed aside, then you go strong. Strong boundaries aren't angry. They're final. No. This stops now. I'm stepping away. Most people jump straight from silence to strong boundaries and wonder why everything explodes. I wasn't doing that anymore. I wasn't punishing them. I was redesigning the rules. They asked me if this meant I didn't love them. I didn't answer right away. Love wasn't the question. The question was whether I was willing to disappear again to keep things smooth. I wasn't. I told them I would stay in contact. I would visit. I would talk. But I wouldn't absorb responsibility just because I was capable. I wouldn't be the safety net no one acknowledged. And if that made the relationship feel unfamiliar, that was part of the change. Apologies are about the past. Conditions are about the future. And I cared more about what came next than about hearing the right words. I didn't need them to fully understand yet. I needed them to respect the structure. Because understanding can fade. Systems don't. If you're watching this and you're in a similar place, here's the part no one tells you. You don't need to burn bridges to protect yourself. But you do need to stop being the only one holding them up. You're allowed to ask for clarity. You're allowed to ask for fairness. You're allowed to ask for proof. And if those requests feel threatening to people, it's not because they're unreasonable. It's because the old arrangement only worked when you didn't ask. If you were me, what would you choose? A familiar apology that changes nothing, or clear conditions that finally give you a future you can stand inside without disappearing. After I set the boundaries, everything got quieter. Not peaceful, just quieter. There were no more late-night messages asking me to fix something. No emails forwarded to me just in case. No casual assumptions that I would step in if things got uncomfortable. The noise stopped first. Then the space appeared. At night, in my apartment by the beach, the silence felt heavier than I expected. The ocean outside moved steadily, but inside, there was nothing to respond to. No one needed me. No one was waiting for an answer. I thought that would feel like freedom. Sometimes it did. Other times, it felt like standing in an empty room after everyone leaves. I'd come home from work, put my bag down, and realize there was no one to report to, no one to check on. No small problem waiting for my attention. I made dinner for one and ate it slowly, listening to the same sounds every night. That's when the memories started creeping in. Not the big ones, the small, ordinary ones. The way the house smelled in the evenings. The sound of the TV playing in the background. Someone calling my name from another room. Not because they needed help, just because they assumed I was there. I miss those moments more than I wanted to admit, even though they came with being overlooked, even though they came with being taken for granted. There were nights I lay in bed and wondered if I'd overreacted, if maybe I should have stayed and just adjusted, learned to tolerate a little more, lowered my expectations again. That thought scared me, because it sounded exactly like the voice that had kept me there for so long. The truth no one tells you is this: after you set boundaries, the first feeling isn't relief, it's emptiness. You stop bleeding, but you're still wounded. You stop carrying weight, but your muscles still remember it. There's a kind of grief that comes with no longer being needed, even when being needed was hurting you, even when it cost you pieces of yourself you didn't know how to get back. I had to learn how to sit with that, to let evenings pass without filling them with usefulness, to let problems exist that weren't mine to solve, to resist the urge to reach back in just to feel relevant again. Some nights, I opened my phone and hovered over familiar names, wondered what would happen if I checked in, if I offered help, if I made it easier. Then I remembered why I left. Peace doesn't always feel warm. Sometimes it feels neutral. Sometimes it feels like space you don't know what to do with yet. I started noticing small changes. I slept through the night more often. I stopped bracing when my phone buzzed. I made plans without checking whether they conflicted with someone else's needs. None of it felt like a victory. It felt like learning how to walk differently. There were still moments of sadness, of doubt, of missing a version of home that had never really been safe for me. That part didn't disappear just because I set rules, but the pain changed shape. Before, it was constant. Now, it came and went. Before, it made me smaller. Now, it passed through me. That's the real cost of leaving. You lose the familiar pain before you fully understand the new peace. You lose the role that defined you before you know who you are without it. And you have to trust that the quiet isn't emptiness. It's room. Room for rest. Room for choice. Room for a version of yourself that isn't built around holding everything together. I didn't wake up one day feeling healed. I woke up feeling honest. Honest about what I missed. Honest about what I'd survived. Honest about what I wasn't willing to return to. If you're watching this and you're in that in-between space, the space after boundaries but before relief, this is the part no one glamorizes. It's lonely sometimes. It's uncomfortable. It asks you to sit with yourself instead of fixing everyone else. But that space is where something important happens. You stop disappearing. And even on the nights when the quiet feels too loud, that matters more than going back to a place where your presence was only valued for what you carried. If you were me, could you live with the emptiness for a while, knowing it's the price of finally having space to exist as yourself? I want to end this by saying something clearly. Being called independent is not the same as being protected. Being told you're strong is not the same as being supported. And being labeled the one who can handle it is often how responsibility gets quietly pushed onto you without consent. I didn't realize that for a long time. I thought those words meant trust. I thought they meant respect. I thought they meant I mattered. What they really meant was that someone else felt comfortable stepping back. People don't always abandon you by leaving. Sometimes they abandon you by deciding you don't need them anymore. And the hardest part is that it sounds reasonable when they say it. You're fine. You've got this. You don't need help. That language turns absence into something that feels earned instead of imposed. Here's what I learned the hard way. Feelings can help you stand up. They can give you clarity. They can give you courage. But feelings alone don't keep you from being pulled back into the same role. Evidence does. Records. Names on accounts. Clear boundaries written down where they can't be reinterpreted later. That's what keeps the ground from shifting under you again. I'm not saying you need to become cold. I'm not saying you need to turn family into a transaction. I'm saying that love without structure always costs the same person more. And if that person has always been you, it's not selfish to stop. It's necessary. Some people will say you've changed. Others will say you've become difficult. A few will say you've gone too far. What they usually mean is that you're no longer absorbing the consequences for everyone else, and that's uncomfortable for them. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If you've always been the one who understands, the one who adjusts, the one who stays quiet to keep things smooth, what would happen if you didn't? Would the house really fall apart? Or would it finally show where the weight has been landing all along? You don't have to disappear to be loyal. You don't have to bleed to prove you care. You're allowed to choose clarity over comfort. You're allowed to choose truth over silence. And if that choice makes some people uneasy, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It means the old arrangement only worked when you didn't question it. So I'll ask you the same thing I had to ask myself. Will you stay quiet to keep the peace in a system that costs you your place in it? Or will you write things down, set the boundary, and let the truth finally have somewhere to stand?